Hi, I'm Sean, a product designer here at Crema, and today we'll be creating a swipe to dismiss interaction in Figma. This is an interaction you're probably familiar with in your messaging app or your email app. Really, any app with an inbox, this is a common paradigm. And this was really fun to revisit because I had done this type of interaction in Figma before, and Figma handles it really well. I just never turned it into a component. So I thought recently there has to be a way to turn this into an interactive, reusable component, and sure enough there is. So we'll look at that process of how I created that. Let's dig in.
What we're looking at today is how to create a swipe to dismiss interaction. The end result feels really cool and looks really complex, but it's just created from a couple elements here and wired up with a couple different interactions at the component level. This is something you might be familiar with if you've used Gmail on iPhone, for example, where you swipe one direction to get archive, you swipe another one to get a delete. As I'm swiping, you're getting this icon moving in from the side, you're getting that colored background, and then ultimately this list is collapsing with fewer and fewer results. Now let's build it. Now we'll start by creating our first frame. I'll choose iPhone 14, and I'll draw out one more frame. Now the size of this frame doesn't matter right now, the content inside of it will ultimately determine the size. And I want this app to have a dark theme, so I've used this dark color elsewhere in the file, so I'll just select that there. Next, I'll create a frame for an avatar image here, and I'll fill that with an image I grabbed from a plugin. I'll begin to name these frames as I create them, and then I'll begin to add some content. So that's the title text, and I'll just duplicate this to make the body text. I'll combine that as an auto layout, and I'll rename it. Now I'll take this whole frame and hit Shift A. Then I'll adjust some of the padding settings down here. Inside, I'll update some of the content settings as well. So I want that to be fill container. And then within inside here, I want that to be fill container as well, so that when I take this and I make the 390 width, all of that gets stretched out. And I can click in here and use one more plugin to fill this with some fake content. And lastly, select this whole frame. Command-Option-K will turn it into a component. And there we have it. This is our very first simple base component. Next, you can draw a new frame of the same size or just take this original component. You want to break this instance from its main. Press Enter, select all the contents inside, and simply delete that out. Again, in my file, I already use a couple colors, so I'll select the green here. I'll hold Option, drag that down, and I'll select the red for this. Next, you can select both these frames and go to the icon here to create multiple components simultaneously. Next, I'll grab a couple icons. These two come from the cool icons file in the community. I highly suggest checking it out. And you'll see how the two frames snapped to the size of the contents in there because I dragged this frame from the one above. What I'll do is go in and reference the size of the frame above and just make these two a fixed height. A couple more tweaks and these two cards will be ready. From here, you can select all of these base cards and combine as variant. Now we'll go in and adjust the properties. We'll leave this one as default, this one as archive, and this one delete. We'll use these three base card components to go on and make our interactive components. You can start by taking this first card here, holding Option and dragging it out. You can hold this down again and duplicate that. Take the second card, assign it archive, and assign the third card delete. You'll notice in the layers panel, all three of these are called the same thing. That's because they come from a variant. We want to rename these now so that the transitions later on animate correctly. Once they're named, move the layers to the proper positioning, highlight them all, and align them vertically. So what you have here is all three cards stacked on top of each other. Highlight all of them and hit Command-Option-K. This is now our base component for all of our animations. We'll do something similar to the first set, where we copy this down and break it, and we duplicate this. I'll go ahead and componentize these two. And before I combine them as a variant, I want to keep these apart so that I can show you what's happening behind the scenes. I want this first card set to be the starting point of our animation. Next, from here, I want this default card to slide off to the right. So I've grabbed that there over in the layers panel. And before I get too close to the end and it snaps out of that frame, I'll stop dragging it and I'll hold Shift and use the arrow keys to push it out to the side. I'll do the same for this, but go the opposite direction. Now in these two states, I don't actually need both versions of it, so I can go ahead and delete the delete card behind there, and actually remove the archive card here to reveal the delete. And finally, grab these two frames and select Clip Content. From here, we can grab these two cards, break them apart from their instances, turn them back into components, and then we'll collapse this height down to a 0 pixel frame by doing 0.001. So now these same cards are present, but one has its full height and one is collapsed down to a 0 pixel height. And next, I'll combine these into a variant and start assigning properties and giving these meaningful names. So now we have the 5 states that will make up our animation. We have the default card on top, we have the archive where the card is moved off to the right, and we have the archive collapsed. We have the delete where the card is moved off to the left, and we have the delete collapsed. One final step before we assign interactions is to style the archive and the delete card behind this default card. So I'll click into these and give them both a 56 pixel width, and then I'll take both and move them off the edge of the frame. Now, there are a couple reasons I'm doing this, but namely, in this first stage here, you have the green and the red cards stacked on each other. Now that would make for a muddy transition as it goes to one of these other two states with just one of these cards present. Another is that by moving these two frames out of that main frame, you get a bit of dynamic motion as the icons move in when you swipe the cards. So I'll show the default card again, I'll select the parent frame and hit Clip Content. With that in place, we're now ready to start assigning interactions. I want to show something really quickly, that if I go here and I want to assign an interaction to this collapsed state, you'll remember that we have that as a 0 pixel high frame. So what you'll first want to do is select those and go and actually give them a couple pixels of height so that when we draw a connection to it, Figma recognizes there's a frame there. Navigate to the prototype tab at the top right here or hitting Shift E. The primary interaction we'll be looking at is the on drag interaction, and that's going to take place here with the default card. But what I want to make clear is that this default card is actually comprised of these other base cards. So all 3 of these are wrapped up in here. So make sure when you're doing this interaction, you're not selecting this at the parent level, but you're selecting the default card that's actually nested in there. With that nested default card selected, take this and drag it down to the archive card. We'll change this from on tap to on drag and apply a smart animate. Do the same thing, but drag this one down to the delete card. Next, we'll take the archive card and drag this down to its collapsed state. We'll change this to an after delay of 100 milliseconds. It already has Smart Animate assigned, which is what we want, but we'll change this to a gentle bounce. That feels really nice when it collapses. We'll do the same for the delete card. To finish up, go back to these collapsed states and assign them their 0 pixel height again. And let's review what we've just done. We took this default card and assigned an on-drag interaction that leads to both this archive and the delete state, and each of these states then have an after delay interaction that goes to their collapse state. Now we're ready to mock up the full interaction. I've pasted in a fake header here, and I'll make this background the same color as the card itself. Take your card here and hold Option and drag one of these into your frame. Next, duplicate this down by holding Option and dragging down. Select both and hit Shift A to make an auto layout frame. Select one of the cards and hit Command D a few times to duplicate them. And finally, we can add a vertical scroll interaction to the whole frame. When we do that, we need to go back and make sure that this header is fixed. Now let's preview this. It scrolls vertically like we would expect, and you can dismiss this to the right to archive, or swipe to the left to delete. And because we've set this up as an auto layout frame, the entire stack of cards collapses as you dismiss. And of course, the main benefit of creating this as an interactive component is that you've created that animation just one time, but you can still go into these instances and override different aspects. So here, we can open up Content Reel again and replace these avatars. You can also replace the text. And so these state changes are being retained even through this transition. So it's going from that default card to the archive, from the default card to the delete, and those image and text overrides are all being retained.
Thanks for watching, and I hope this was helpful. Like and subscribe for more content like this. And if there's an interaction that you're thinking through and you think it might be possible in Figma, let us know in the comments below and we'll try to recreate that.